Something subtle but forceful is pulsing beneath the surface today. An atmospheric pressure that doesn't show up in the sky, but lands directly in the nervous system. While the collective insists that this is a moment for setting intentions and calling in clarity, there's a quieter mechanism at work, one that thrives on that very assumption. What's dangerous about this cycle is not its intensity, but its disguise. Most are stepping into what feels like alignment, when in fact they're stepping into a room where the lights are rigged to flicker. The design of this moment is clever. It mimics stillness, serenity, and sacredness, just enough to lower the guard. But beneath that surface calm, there's a current engineered to disorient the deeper instincts. Ever walked into a place that smelled like safety, only to realize later it had been dressed in someone else's expectations? That's what this is. The risk isn't in chaos, it's in comfort. And strange as it sounds, even a perfectly ordered space can be the most deceptive one to enter tonight. What's being triggered here doesn't knock on the door, it slides in between thoughts unannounced. And just out of curiosity, has anything felt slightly off lately, even when everything looked fine? Go ahead and name it. Drop today's date somewhere as a marker, a witness, a conscious timestamp. There's value in naming things. But before anything else unfolds, there's one shape-shifting snare that needs to be recognized. And it doesn't wear a face, carry a voice, or live in anyone's words. Its silence is its signature, and its influence begins right where people tend to feel most secure. What's coming next might just be the missing piece you didn't know you were looking for. Hit subscribe, because the next message wasn't meant to be missed. There's a strange kind of hush that descends during this lunar phase. Not the kind that invites reflection, but the kind that sits too still, like a room where all the air has been pulled out. It doesn't matter if the moon has crested, waned, or is still climbing. This energetic swell is active, stretching across time zones like a net. And within it, the first distortion takes shape, cloaked as calm. It's easy to mistake this dense quiet as something sacred, but it isn't emptiness, it's static. An unseen frequency pretending to be restfulness, slipping into meditation sessions, trailing behind post-ritual pauses, coating the edges of a well-lit space. Notice how it doesn't soothe, but compresses, not like silence, but like suspension. Have you ever sat in a room so quiet it started to feel invasive? That's the signature of this phenomenon. There's a particular kind of vibrational stillness that sneaks in tonight, not to comfort, but to confuse. And while it might seem wise to sink into it, to chase the quiet deeper in hopes of clarity, that path doesn't lead inward right now. It leads sideways, into scrambled signals, into echo chambers of emotional noise disguised as guidance. The danger tonight isn't chaos, it's stillness that doesn't breathe back. Sometimes the best thing to do isn't to chase silence, but to soften the static with something gently alive. A low hum of music, the rhythm of breath, the repetition of words that still carry meaning. Not to drown anything out, but to keep the frequency from collapsing inward. Because in the kind of quiet this moon creates, perception doesn't sharpen, it dissolves. The voice that once echoed with clarity now gets lost in a room with no walls. And what often gets misread as depletion is rarely defeat. It's a signal of recalibration. When the mind feels numb, the heart detached, or the inner compass keeps spinning, it isn't failure speaking, it's the body catching up to the soul's next step. This particular lunar current tends to squeeze the excess out of the system before anything essential can rise. It's no surprise if it feels like moving through syrup, or like last month's clarity suddenly became this week's static. That sensation of dragging through the day, of hitting the same emotional wall again, it's not regression, it's compression. Transformation, when real, often doesn't announce itself. It presses, condenses, and shakes the system until something more refined can hold. Ever noticed how the biggest shifts tend to come after the quietest collapses? Difficulty doesn't always signal a detour. Sometimes it's the forge itself, where identity sheds its scaffolding and becomes something more elemental. This lunar window isn't built to applaud effort or hand out instant clarity. It holds up a mirror that reflects growth still in progress, stripped of applause. Real strength rarely makes a sound. It operates in the margins, unseen by others, often dismissed even by the one carrying it. If numbness or doubt has crept in like fog over a quiet town, it doesn't mean the signal is gone. It means the noise is being drained so something purer can emerge. Often, those experiencing the deepest disconnect are transmitting the most potent shift. Curious, isn't it? That the strongest upgrades tend to arrive under the cloak of invisibility. Fatigue, stagnation, boredom, they're not malfunctions. They're the body adjusting to higher frequencies before the mind can catch up. Progress isn't loud. It whispers through resistance. This isn't a stall, it's a refining process. And the strange truth? Even the realm of sleep isn't a refuge tonight. There's movement happening there too, beneath the eyelids, behind the dreams. Has anything unusual stirred after midnight lately? If something inside you felt still while watching this, it means you're aligning. Subscribe and stay close, because the transmission continues. Not everything that shows up in the dark is a message from the beyond. Sometimes it's interference wearing the mask of insight. Tonight's descent into sleep doesn't promise sanctuary. In fact, that's when the grip of this moon tightens its hold on the subconscious terrain. The scenes that unfold behind closed eyes do not originate from the self. They just feel charged with meaning, cryptic maps, surreal symbols, strangely intimate encounters. But caution is key. Not all clarity is truth. Some visions are engineered distractions, emotional decoys, spiritual noise shaped to look like purpose. A haunting dream that clings like fog upon waking isn't random. It's resonance, amplified by a charged astral layer. The deeper architecture of the psyche is wide open tonight, more porous, more suggestible. This isn't about fear, it's about awareness. Even the act of setting a mental anchor before bed, however simple, can mark territory. For some, a window between 2 and 4 a.m., jun open, fragments of motion, a sting behind the eyes, sudden wakefulness with no cause. Others jun wander through recursive scenes, familiar figures reanimated, movements stuck like skipping records. Ever woken up from something that felt scripted rather than spontaneous? That's not imagination, it's indication. The body jun rest, but consciousness isn't idle. It's navigating places where memory and meaning are rewritten. And in that liminal space, even silence becomes charged. Energy doesn't require chaos to become entangled. It just needs an opening, sometimes as simple as sleep without intention. A space can look like harmony and still hum with unrest. That's the paradox of this particular lunar current. It doesn't scan surfaces, it scans resonance. And tonight, some will step into rooms curated to perfection. Soft light, scent trails from resin or herbs, the quiet hum of order, yet feel an odd undercurrent, like the air is holding its breath. That tension doesn't come from the objects, it comes from the space between the intention and the energy that built it. When the external is aligned but the internal hasn't caught up, the split becomes louder. This moon doesn't respond to how polished a space appears. It responds to whether the frequency of the room matches the signal of the being inside it. That's why a spotless sanctuary can start to feel strangely agitating. Meditation becomes cluttered with noise. Old doubts return through the back door. Not because the rituals are flawed, but because the energy beneath them is unanchored. Ever had a moment where everything looked fine, but something in the room felt staged? That's not decoration, it's distortion, and distortion echoes, especially tonight. The most dangerous clutter doesn't pile on bookshelves, it gathers in the field around them. So here's a real question worth pausing for. Does the room feel safe or just look that way? This moon reveals not what is visible, but what has been ignored beneath the shine. Some vibrations are so sweet they slip past the filters, bright, effervescent, and just detached enough to feel transcendent. But not everything that lifts is leading toward truth. This particular lunar surge has a way of mimicking clarity, presenting a spike in frequency that feels like revelation, but moves more like a sugar rush. The sensation can be intoxicating, like the air is electric, the heart expanded, the mind tuned into some higher channel. And while that can feel like alignment, Sometimes it's just overstimulation with good PR. What feels like a gateway just be a glitch. There's a difference between insight and intoxication, and this full moon draws that line with eerie precision. Ever had one of those days where everything suddenly made perfect sense, only to dissolve the next morning like a dream you can't quite recall? That's the mirage this energy loves to cast. It invites transcendence without embodiment. But the task isn't to hover in the heights, it's to root into the real. Tonight's work is less about elevation and more about embodiment. Breath, presence, density, memory. So if there's a sudden urge to float above it all, maybe pause and ask, is this clarity or is this escape? There's a quiet kind of wisdom that doesn't come wrapped in light. It comes in staying grounded when everything else begs for flight. If you understood even part of this, it means the signal is reaching you. Subscribe. The rest will make sense soon enough. Gratitude, when genuine, is a medicine, but when pushed out of timing, it turns into a tranquilizer for truth. There's a common distortion that floats around sacred circles. The idea that thankfulness must always be present, no matter what the moment brings. But tonight's atmosphere isn't asking for sugar-coated affirmations. It's wired for exposure. This moon isn't polishing surfaces, it's cracking them. And under its watch, forced thankfulness acts like a glaze, shiny but sealing in the rot. If the gratitude doesn't rise from the marrow, speaking it out loud becomes a form of energetic censorship. It's not healing to thank the ache before it's been named, it's bypass. This full moon doesn't respond to politeness, it listens for honesty. Try too hard to float above the discomfort, and the gravity will tighten. What's being tested isn't the ability to stay positive, it's the capacity to stay real. If the air feels heavy or the mood jagged, there's no need to spiritualize it into a lesson too soon. Don't wrap silence around frustration or bury fatigue beneath hollow praise. Ever noticed how saying something before it's true makes the body recoil? That's the signal. Let the thanks come when they're ready. Not every moment needs a bow tied around it. Sometimes clarity demands the raw edge to stay exposed, if only for a little longer. There's a particular tension that arises when something internally believes it has arrived. And under this moon, that exact pressure gets amplified, not to punish, but to reveal. Tonight doesn't reward track records or spiritual resumes. It moves past the polished edges and taps on the part that quietly thinks the work is over. That tap? It shows up as impatience, unexplained defensiveness, or the urge to dismiss what used to feel sacred. It's not sabotage, it's the unraveling of spiritual pride. The ego doesn't just show up in vanity or ambition. It also hides in the belief that nothing more needs to be learned. And this is where things get tricky. The illusion of completion is one of the most convincing masks this moon wears. It creates a gentle sense of closure, a feeling that something has resolved, that peace has landed, that all loops have been sealed. But what if that softness is just intermission, not finale? What if the page isn't the end, but a fold? This lunar light doesn't finalize stories, it reframes them. It reopens doors just closed, and it does so with timing so elegant it feels like relief. That's how it works. So if something feels oddly complete tonight, pause and ask, is this truth or just a well-crafted pause between lessons? The next chapter rarely announces itself with fanfare. It arrives quietly, disguised as something unfinished or unfamiliar. That's the curve of this moment, expectation and preparation moving on separate tracks. There's no need to predict what's next. The design has already started folding into place beneath the surface. And tonight, presence is more powerful than precision. When false doors are left unopened and old patterns aren't reactivated, the energy aligns in a way that makes space for what's actually needed. The moon doesn't test to punish, it distills. It strips away the unnecessary so what remains can carry what's coming. That's why this timing matters. Every avoided misstep becomes a thread in the next pattern. And the feeling that something is concluding, it's not an ending. It's a pause with instructions hidden inside. Does that resonate? It should, because readiness doesn't come from knowing. It comes from not betraying the signal. And tonight's signal is quiet but clear. If you felt something here, like it was meant just for you, Maybe it was. Subscribe. No need to explain it. Just stay.